Hi everyone, it's Allie, and this is my spoiler-free review for The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. So this book just came out this month, and I was super excited to read it, and I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. Let me get a little bit into the synopsis real quick. It is about a girl named Decca who lives in a heavily patriarchal society. Kind of feels almost like a dystopian in the beginning of the book, as you see women being treated as lesser than men, and also all women who are over the age of 16 wear masks in public, and will generally be taken around with some member of their family that is a man as a escort wherever they go. Decca is approaching her blood ceremony, which happens to every girl in her village at the age of 16, where they spill some blood, and if the blood runs red, they are pure, but if the blood runs gold, they are impure. However, her blood ceremony is interrupted by a bunch of death shrieks, which are basically these monstrous creatures who are threatening all of mankind. When they come to the village, she compels them away with the ability no one knows she has, and then she bleeds, and she bleeds gold. Now, I will go with what the back of the book says, in that bleeding gold in a village like this is a fate worse than death, but eventually she gets a reprieve as she is offered a position in the Emperor's army to fight these monstrous creatures, the Death Streaks. She takes the offer, and the whole story kind of goes from there. So this was a debut novel for the author. The author, from my research, had done some screenplays and written for TV shows and stuff like that prior to writing this book, but this is her first book. And I think as this was her first book, she is going to improve with her writing style as the series goes on. Some of the positive things I have to say about this book are that the story was really interesting and intriguing, and I liked the mix of dystopian feeling at the beginning with the fantasy that comes as the story progresses. I kind of felt like it was almost a nice mix of those two genres, to where you would almost think of it as like a normal YA fantasy, but also with a hint of The Handmaid's Tale or maybe even The Gracier, that are more like dystopian books about female submission, so to speak. And then you also have this great structure that's really well plotted out of the patriarchal society and how they do things and how they subject women, and then how women learn to accept that oppression and are submissive to it, and also believe in the religion that has kind of been created within the empire. Later on in the book, you also get to see patriarchy and matriarchy, and the stark comparison between the two is really interesting. That's basically all I'll say about that, because I don't want to spoil it, but the patriarchy in the book is as interesting as the matriarchy in the book ends up being. Another thing I really like is Decca was raised a certain way, and because she was raised this way, she believes what she was raised to believe. And then throughout the story, she gets gradual revelations that she sees about her own life that allows her to really come into herself and understand the world through her own eyes as she learns more through the experiences she gains in this army that she ends up joining. And the gradual change in Decca's character of her beliefs and how she thinks is actually very well done. And I would definitely recommend the book for the character development of the main character. Thumbs up to that. The other thing I really appreciated it is in some books there's a lot of drama between female characters, more than really happens in real life even. But in this book, she basically gets along with the other girls that she meets, and they form very strong friendships, and you see women lifting each other up more often than you see them tearing each other down. And I thought that was refreshing. I enjoyed seeing a large group of women who get along and boost each other. And I definitely think this book was creative. Now, as it was a debut novel for the author, I feel like, as I already mentioned, her writing will improve with time, but as of right now, the writing does feel a little bit clunky. The transitions sometimes are a little bit rough. There's like these big time skips that seem like they don't flow as well as they can. Progression of relationships, for example, don't flow as well as they can. For example, there is a romantic relationship in this book that sometimes is endearing and cute, but you don't actually really feel much for the couple, at least in my experience, because you don't really have that smooth flow and progression within the relationship. It's kind of just like It's one way one day and another way the next day, and that also felt a little clunky. Along with that, because I feel like the writing could be a little bit improved even though the story is solid, when something really tragic happens to a character in the book, I just felt myself not really caring that it happened to them. It's kind of like, oh, that's just a plot thing that happened and we're moving on. Let's see what happens next. So tragic things happening to characters that we're supposed to feel for didn't really hit me here. Rather, it made me wonder, oh, what's going to be the big twist at the end? I feel like the writing could have facilitated feeling more for the characters, and I personally didn't feel very much for them, even though I did appreciate the story and I did appreciate the main character's progression. And it does fall into using some YA tropes that are common that would be giving it away to tell you the tropes. But I felt, even though it was interesting and it was new, there was also times where I felt like the next twist was going to be a little bit predictable. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with a book being predictable, because sometimes a story needs to be consistent with itself. And if you could predict it, that means that the foreshadowing was effective. For me, though, it was just a little bit too predictable for my own taste. It was kind of like too obvious so that the actual reveal didn't feel like much of a reveal at all. Overall, though, I do think this is a really good book. The other thing that I just want to mention is, since it is marketed YA and is a YA book, I would like to mention that's a little bit more violent than most YA books. And as for me, I did not care. I think this is still appropriate for a teenager to read. But if you personally don't want to see a bunch of violence, this has some more than average for a YA book in it. So keep that in mind. Overall, I think The Gilded Ones is a very worthwhile read. I gave it 3.5 stars, but for a debut author, debut novel, this is a very good rating for me. I imagine as she continues the series, her writing will only get better, and a lot of that clunkiness and the rough transitions will eventually smooth out to make a very, very solid series. So I'd recommend picking this up if you're interested in it. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you later.